What starts as a joyful family road trip soon takes an unexpected turn that will test their courage, resilience, and unity in ways they never imagined. Marcus Turner, a devoted father and a decorated CIA officer, planned the perfect trip to celebrate his daughter Erin's acceptance to her dream school. But as the Turner family cruises through the sunlit backroads of New Mexico, the flashing lights of a police patrol car signal the beginning of a life-changing encounter. What should have been a routine stop quickly spirals into a tense and unsettling confrontation. As their belongings are tossed aside and accusations linger in the air, Marcus finds himself standing against more than just injustice. He's standing to protect his family's dignity and future. But when his calm resolve reaches its breaking point, a shocking revelation shifts the balance of power and sets off a ripple effect far beyond that desert roadside. With the world watching, Marcus and his family must navigate the storm of public attention, growing support, and difficult questions. Will they find justice, or will their voices be lost in the noise? The Texas sky was just beginning to lighten, with streaks of pink and gold stretching across the horizon. Marcus Turner stood in the driveway of his modest two-story home, the cool morning air brushing against his face. He took in the quiet street, listening to the soft hum of life waking up around him, the chirp of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the faint scent of fresh dew. He closed the trunk of their rented SUV with a satisfying thud. It was packed with bags, a cooler filled with drinks, and Jack's ever-present camera bag. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to relax, enjoy the open road, and mark a milestone in their lives. Lisa stepped out onto the porch, tying her hair back into a ponytail as she checked her phone. Her dependable presence always calmed Marcus. She had been the glue of their family through every hardship, including his years of travel and unpredictable hours. "Is everything ready?" she asked, her voice carrying that familiar note of care. Marcus smiled. "We're ready. GPS set, chargers packed, and I even remembered the snacks." Lisa chuckled softly, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Good. You know how cranky Jack gets without snacks." Jack, their 15-year-old son, appeared from the front door with his camera in hand, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the pavement. His face lit up as he took a few photos of the SUV. "I'm documenting everything," Jack said proudly. "This trip is going to be epic." Marcus shook his head, amused by Jack's endless enthusiasm. "Just remember to live the moment, not just capture it." Erin followed behind Jack, her smile wide as she adjusted the Columbia University sweatshirt she had worn almost every day since receiving her acceptance letter. At 18, she carried herself with a quiet strength, though Marcus could see the nervous excitement in her eyes. "Last family road trip before I'm off to New York," Erin said, glancing around as if she wanted to commit every detail of home to memory. Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest. The thought of Erin moving across the country both filled him with pride and tugged at his heart. But he pushed the feeling aside. Today was about celebration. "All right," Lisa said as she slid into the passenger seat. "Let's get moving before the heat kicks in." Erin climbed into the back seat, settling in with a book, while Jack took the other side, adjusting his camera for another shot. Marcus slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine rumbling to life. As they pulled out of the driveway, laughter filled the car. Jack switched through the playlist until a familiar road trip anthem blared through the speakers. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Erin's smile and Jack's wide-eyed excitement. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt at peace. The open road stretched out before them like a promise of adventure, lined with wildflowers swaying gently in the morning breeze. The Turners were on their way to Santa Fe, where family and friends waited to celebrate Erin's achievement. Marcus had mapped out scenic stops along the way, determined to make this journey as memorable as possible. Lisa leaned her head back and sighed contentedly. "This was a great idea, Marcus. He smiled. "I told you, sometimes you need the long road to enjoy the view." The first few hours of the drive passed in a blissful haze of music, conversation, and laughter. They stopped at a roadside diner for breakfast, snapping photos of Jack pretending to devour a stack of pancakes bigger than his head. They took in the sweeping views of the desert, where the mesas rose like ancient monuments against the blue sky. As they neared the New Mexico border, the road narrowed and curved, dipping into secluded stretches of rocky landscape. Jack leaned closer to the window, adjusting the lens of his camera. "This view is incredible," he said, focusing on a formation of jagged red rocks. "I think this might be the best shot of the trip so far." Marcus glanced at Lisa, who smiled and nodded. "It really is beautiful." But just as they rounded a bend, something changed. A sudden flash of red and blue lights filled the rearview mirror. Lisa's smile faded. "Marcus, are they pulling us over?" Marcus frowned but stayed calm. "Looks like it." He slowed the SUV and pulled over to the gravel shoulder. The sirens stopped, but the lights continued to flash behind them, painting the desert in jolts of red and blue. Jack sat up straight, his excitement replaced by confusion. "Why are we being stopped?" "Probably just routine," Marcus said, though he could feel a tension settle over him like a weight. The patrol car stopped behind them, and the sound of two doors opening reached their ears. Marcus watched in the rearview mirror as two officers approached. One was tall and lanky, his sunglasses glinting in the sun. The other was shorter and broader, his expression hard and unreadable. His hand rested on the belt near his holstered weapon. Lisa's hand moved instinctively toward Marcus's arm. He glanced at her and gave a small nod to reassure her. "Stay calm," Marcus said quietly as he rolled down the window. The warm, dry air rushed in. The shorter officer stepped forward, his face partially obscured by his sunglasses. "License and registration," he said, his tone flat but commanding. Marcus moved slowly, keeping his hands visible as he reached into the glove compartment and handed the officer the requested documents. "Is there a problem, officer?" The man barely glanced at the papers before asking, "Where are you headed?" "Santa Fe," Marcus answered evenly. "We're on a family trip." The taller officer leaned slightly to peer into the back seat. His gaze lingered on Aaron, who shifted uncomfortably. Jack stared back defiantly, his camera clutched in his hands. "What's in the car?" the taller officer asked. Marcus's jaw tightened, though his voice remained steady. "Just our luggage. Clothes, snacks, nothing unusual." The shorter officer's lip curled slightly. "Mind if we take a look?" Lisa's breath caught. "Marcus." Marcus took a slow breath, feeling the shift in the air. His instincts told him this was more than a simple stop. He glanced at his family, reading the unease in their eyes. He turned back to the officer, his voice calm but firm. "Is that necessary?" The shorter officer's smile was thin and humorless. "Just routine," he said, but everything in his tone suggested otherwise. In that moment, Marcus knew this encounter would change everything. The desert stretched out in every direction, vast and unyielding. The mesas stood like ancient guardians under the New Mexico sky. The air was still, save for the soft rustling of the wind brushing against the dry brush. The flashing red and blue lights felt jarringly out of place, turning the peaceful scene into something surreal. Marcus Turner sat motionless for a moment, studying the officers through the side mirror. His instincts sharpened the same instincts that had kept him safe during his years in the field. Something about this stop felt off. Lisa shifted uneasily in her seat, her hand resting on the armrest. Jack leaned forward, watching everything with wide, questioning eyes. Erin clutched the edge of her seatbelt, her knuckles pale. Marcus took a slow breath and opened the door. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he stepped out, keeping his hands visible. The shorter officer was waiting, eyes shielded behind mirrored sunglasses. "Just a precaution," the officer said, though his tone felt anything but routine. Marcus nodded once, calm and composed. Understood. Lisa's eyes followed Marcus as he stepped aside, silently praying this would be over quickly. The taller officer circled around to the passenger side, motioning for Lisa to exit. Out of the car, ma'am. You too, kids. Lisa hesitated, but gave Marcus a questioning glance. He nodded, small, subtle, but enough to signal that she should comply. She opened her door, stepping out with steady composure, though Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. Jack climbed out, gripping his camera bag tightly. Erin followed, her face pale but resolute. The family stood in a quiet line beside the SUV, their shadows stretching long across the gravel. The shorter officer strode toward the back of the vehicle and began his search, tugging open the trunk and rifling through their carefully packed luggage. Marcus watched as Erin's textbooks tumbled out of her bag, the pages catching the wind and flapping like startled wings. "Hey!" Jack's voice rang out before he could stop himself. "That's our stuff!" The taller officer spun toward Jack, his expression tightening. "Quiet!" Jack flinched but didn't lower his gaze, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Marcus stepped forward slightly, placing himself between the officer and Jack. His calm voice returned, steady as stone. "He's just a kid. No need for that." The shorter officer glanced up from the trunk, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "Sir, step back," he ordered, his hand drifting closer to the baton hanging from his belt. Marcus didn't move immediately. For a brief second, the air between them thickened. The officer's hand twitched, but Marcus met his gaze without flinching, without raising his voice. Lisa reached out and touched Marcus's arm. "Please," she whispered. Slowly, Marcus took a small step back, enough to de-escalate, but not enough to show weakness. The officers resumed their search, tossing aside travel bags, shifting through personal belongings, as though they were sifting for something they had already decided they would find. Erin's lip trembled as her makeup bag spilled across the gravel. Jack's camera case was opened carelessly, and one of the lenses clattered to the ground. Jack gasped, stepping forward. "That's fragile. You can't—" "Jack? No," Lisa said, her voice tight with warning. Marcus reached out and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, firm but reassuring. "Stay close to your mom," he said softly. Jack's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but he stayed put, biting back the words that threatened to spill over. The minutes dragged on, every second a deliberate act of humiliation. Marcus watched it all, memorized every movement, every expression exchanged between the two officers. Finally, the shorter officer stepped back from the trunk and straightened. His expression was sour, like he was dissatisfied with the results of their intrusion. "We're not getting the right answers," he muttered as he dusted off his hands. Marcus's patience, already thin, was beginning to unravel. He stepped forward again, his voice calm but carrying a new edge of warning. "I've answered everything you asked. We're just passing through. You have my license, my registration, and you've searched our car. Now I'd like to know why this stop is still happening." The taller officer, standing near the front of the SUV, folded his arms and smirked. "We don't get many out-of-state cars around here," he said, "especially with a story that sounds a little too neat." Lisa took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "It's a family trip. What more do you need?" The shorter officer ignored her, nodding toward Erin. "Let's check IDs for the passengers. Start with her." Erin's eyes widened. She clutched her small wallet, shaking her head slightly. "Why, I'm not—" Before she could finish, Marcus took a slow but deliberate step forward. "There is no reason for that," he said firmly. The taller officer's smirk widened as he motioned toward Erin. "Just show your ID, miss, unless you have something to hide." Before Erin could move, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the camera app. "I'm recording this," Jack announced, his voice shaky but determined. Both officers turned sharply. The shorter officer's eyes darkened as he stormed toward Jack. "What do you think you're doing with that phone?" Jack held the phone higher. "It's not illegal. I'm not going to let you mess with my family." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The officer reached for the phone, but Jack held on tight. The phone wavered between them until crack. The phone hit the gravel with a sickening sound, the screen splintering into jagged lines of light. A beat of silence followed, heavy and charged. Jack stared down at the shattered device, disbelief filling his face. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Aaron's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Marcus's calm demeanor finally slipped, revealing a flash of something deeper controlled fury. "That was unnecessary," Marcus said, his voice low, but unmistakably dangerous. The officers faltered for a fraction of a second. Jack's defiance, Lisa's fear, Aaron's quiet devastation, it all surged in Marcus's mind. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. The officers' authority still cloaked them, but Marcus's presence had shifted. He could feel the next steps unfolding in his mind, as clear as any mission briefing. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The shards of Jack's phone glittered in the morning sun, a stark reminder of how quickly the situation had spiraled. Jack's face was pale, his shock giving way to anger. Lisa's hand trembled as she reached out to steady him. Marcus's gaze never left the officers. He felt the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay composed. Losing control would only make things worse. He took a slow step forward, blocking the officer's path to his family. "Breaking my son's phone?" Marcus said evenly. His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was impossible to miss. "Is that part of your routine?" The shorter officer shifted, his hand brushing the baton at his waist. The taller one crossed his arms, his smug expression unchanged. "We warned him," the taller officer said. "Recording escalates things. You should have told your son to listen." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the officer. "My son was defending his family, and now you're trying to justify smashing his property." Jack clenched his fists, his breathing uneven. "That was everything," he muttered, his voice tight. "All my videos, my project." Lisa wrapped an arm around him. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, though Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. Erin stood frozen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. The shorter officer took a step forward, close enough for Marcus to see his clenched jaw. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." Marcus didn't move. Instead, he spoke slowly, deliberately. "You've already searched our car and found nothing. You've destroyed my son's phone. And now you're threatening to escalate this further?" The officer's face reddened. "Don't push it." Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. He glanced at Lisa, then at Aaron and Jack. The fear in their faces made something shift inside him. He had seen fear like that before on the faces of civilians caught in dangerous crossfire overseas, but never on his family. That was something he could not accept. "You've crossed a line," Marcus said, his voice quiet but sharp. "Enough." The taller officer took a step toward Aaron. "Hand over your ID," he ordered. Erin's hands trembled as she reached for her wallet. Before she could pull it out, Marcus raised his hand, stopping her. His movements were slow, controlled, an unmistakable show of restraint. "No," he said. "They have no reason to ask for that." The taller officer's eyes narrowed. The smirk that had hovered on his face began to falter. Lisa's voice broke the silence, her fear giving way to frustration. "What more do you want from us? We're just a family on a trip. Why are you doing this?" The shorter officer ignored her and turned to Marcus. "Last chance. Step back, or—" Marcus held up his hands, cutting the officer off. "Let me show you something." The officers tensed immediately. The shorter one's hand hovered near his holster. Marcus moved slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket. Every movement was deliberate, telegraphing that he was in control. He knew exactly how this moment would play out. "Easy," the taller officer warned, his stance shifting. Marcus pulled out a slim black wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gold badge that caught the sunlight. The letters CIA gleamed unmistakably against the leather. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The officers stared at the badge as if it had knocked the breath out of them. Marcus met their stunned expressions without flinching. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of someone who had spent years commanding respect. "You're out of line." The taller officer took a hesitant step back. "We didn't know." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You didn't care." Lisa blinked, relief and disbelief crossing her face at once. Erin's hand flew to her mouth. Jack's eyes widened. The officers, who moments ago had been the embodiment of unshaken authority, now looked like children caught in a lie. The shorter officer tried to speak, but the words faltered in his throat. "You profiled my family," Marcus continued. "You harassed us, destroyed our property, and escalated a simple stop into a violation of our rights." He took a step forward, and the officers instinctively backed up. The taller officer finally found his voice, though it came out shaky. "We were just doing our job." Marcus's gaze hardened. "Your job does not include intimidation and destruction." The shorter officer swallowed hard. "We didn't mean for things to go this far." Marcus took another step closer, his badge still visible. "It went too far the moment you decided my family was suspicious, based on nothing but assumptions. And now, you're going to be held accountable." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The balance of power had shifted completely. Behind Marcus, Jack whispered, "Dad." Marcus turned slightly and met his son's eyes. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. Jack nodded, though his lips still trembled. The sound of a crackling radio interrupted the moment. The taller officer fumbled with his device, speaking into it in low tones. Moments later, another voice responded, calm, authoritative. "Sergeant on his way," the officer muttered. Marcus folded his arms, his calm composure returning. "Good, we'll wait." A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled up behind the patrol car. A man in his early 50s stepped out, his expression severe. His uniform was crisp, his bearing professional. He took in the scene with one sweep of his eyes, the scattered belongings, Jack's shattered phone, the tense faces of the officers, and the family. "What happened here?" the sergeant asked, his voice sharp. Marcus stepped forward, his badge still in hand. "Your officers harassed my family, destroyed my son's phone, and violated our rights. I want an explanation." The sergeant's jaw tightened. He turned to the officers. "Is this true?" The silence that followed was damning. Neither officer spoke. Marcus didn't wait for their defense. "My son recorded everything before they broke his phone. I'll be recovering that footage." The sergeant's expression darkened as he took in the full weight of Marcus's words. "This will be investigated," he said firmly. "I give you my word." Marcus's voice softened, but the edge of authority remained. "Accountability, that's what I expect, not apologies." The sergeant nodded solemnly. "Understood." As the officers slunk back toward their patrol car, Lisa exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Jack knelt and gathered the shattered pieces of his phone, his shoulders still tense but steadier now. Erin moved closer to her dad, wrapping her arms around him. Marcus held his family close, feeling the weight of the moment settle. They had made it through. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The desert breeze whispered across the road, carrying a stillness that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Marcus stood with his family gathered close, his arms still resting protectively around Erin's shoulder. Jack was crouched on the ground, collecting the shattered pieces of his phone. The sergeant's presence had shifted the balance, but the damage had already been done. Lisa rubbed Jack's back gently. "We'll fix it," she whispered. "The videos, the photos, we'll recover them." Jack nodded, though his fingers trembled as he picked up the cracked screen. His eyes were red, but he blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "It's not just the phone," he said quietly. "It's everything." Marcus's heart ached at Jack's words. He knew exactly what his son meant. It wasn't just about the device, it was about dignity, about control, about fear. Marcus knelt down beside Jack and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We'll make this right," Marcus said, his voice low but resolute. "All of it." Jack met his father's eyes, searching for reassurance. He found it in the unwavering calm that Marcus had always carried, even in the face of chaos. The sergeant cleared his throat, drawing their attention. His face was serious, and his words were measured. "Mr. Turner, I can't undo what's happened, but I can guarantee you that there will be a full investigation. You'll have my full cooperation." Marcus straightened and faced the sergeant. "I appreciate that. But promises won't erase the trauma my family just experienced." He motioned toward the scattered luggage and Jack's broken phone. "We're not just another case file. This shouldn't happen to anyone." The sergeant nodded solemnly. "You're right. I'll ensure there's accountability." Marcus watched the sergeant's face carefully. He wasn't sure yet if the man's words were empty or genuine, but he decided to give him the benefit of the doubt for now. "Then you'll understand why I'm holding on to everything we've recorded," Marcus said. "We're not going to let this get swept under the rug." The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Understood." He turned to the officers, who were standing awkwardly by the patrol car, their earlier bravado completely gone. "You two, back to the station, now." The officers hesitated for a moment before climbing back into the patrol car. The engine roared to life, and with a spray of gravel, they drove away. Lisa exhaled shakily and hugged Aaron tightly. "It's over," she murmured, though her voice trembled. "No," Marcus corrected gently. "It's not over, but it's a start." The sergeant stayed for a few minutes longer, taking a final sweep of the scene before turning to leave. "We'll be in touch," he said. As the sergeant drove away, the road fell silent once more. Marcus walked back to the SUV and began picking up their belongings. Jack and Aaron followed, helping him gather the clothes and books that had been tossed aside. Lisa dusted off Aaron's textbook, frowning at the bent pages. "Some celebration," Aaron muttered as she knelt to retrieve her tote bag. Marcus gave her a soft smile. "We're still together. That's what matters." Jack stood up, holding his broken phone. "Dad, can we still get to Santa Fe?" Marcus paused, glancing toward the horizon where the road stretched ahead of them. "Yes," he said with quiet determination. "We're going to Santa Fe, and we're going to enjoy the rest of this trip." Lisa's eyes softened as she looked at Marcus. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded firmly. "We're not going to let them take this from us." Lisa's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "Okay," she said. The family loaded the last of their things back into the SUV. Marcus took the driver's seat once again, his hands steady on the wheel. Jack settled in beside Aaron, holding the broken phone in his lap like it was a fragile artifact. As they pulled back onto the road, the silence in the car was heavy, but not oppressive. They needed time to process what had happened. Aaron stared out the window, watching the desert blur by, while Lisa quietly scrolled through her phone, probably double-checking their route. A few miles later, Jack broke the silence. "Do you think the video is backed up in the cloud?" Lisa glanced over her shoulder. "It should be, if it was connected." Jack's face lit up with a flicker of hope. "I think it was. If it's saved, then we still have it." Marcus caught Jack's eye in the rearview mirror. "That's why we're not giving up," he said. Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah." He shifted in his seat and pulled out his backup camera. "I'm not done documenting this trip." Aaron gave him a small smile. "We'll make some good memories to add to the collection." The SUV hummed along the open road, the miles slipping away behind them. They reached Santa Fe by late afternoon, the sun dipping low as they pulled into the driveway of Marcus's brother's house. A small group of family members gathered outside to greet them, waving and cheering as they pulled in. Lisa stepped out first, greeted by warm hugs and laughter. Erin was swept into an embrace by her cousins, who peppered her with questions about college. Jack grinned as he showed his aunts and uncles his camera, talking about the photos he had taken along the way. For a moment, the heaviness of the morning lifted. The warmth of family filled the space where fear had once been. Marcus stood back for a moment, watching his family recenter themselves. The ache in his chest eased slightly. But he knew he couldn't push the morning's events aside completely. Lisa slipped her arm through his. "We made it," she said softly. Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "We did." Her eyes searched his. "But," Marcus exhaled, "but I can't let it end here." Lisa nodded. "We'll figure it out together." A sudden shout from Jack broke the somber mood. "It's here!" he yelled, holding up Lisa's phone. "The video! It's in the cloud! It's saved!" The family gathered around as Jack replayed the recording. The shaky footage showed everything: the officers rifling through their belongings, the destruction of the phone, Marcus standing firm. The room fell silent as the video played to the end. Lisa reached for Marcus's hand and squeezed it tightly. Marcus's expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with quiet resolve. "They're going to see this," he said. "The world's going to know." Jack's face glowed with pride. "We're not powerless," he said softly. Marcus nodded. "No, we're not." The family huddled together, a circle of resilience in the face of injustice. The road behind them had been long, but the road ahead would be even longer, and they were ready for it. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan, as Jack replayed the video. The shaky footage captured everything: the officer's invasive search, the destruction of the phone, and Marcus's calm but firm stand. The images flickered across Lisa's phone screen, the voices distorted slightly by the wind, but still unmistakably clear. Erin crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her face pale as she watched. "It's all there," she whispered. Marcus stood with his arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, it is." Lisa bit her lip, glancing at Marcus. "What do we do with it?" Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "We share it," he said firmly. "People need to see this." Marcus looked at his son, at the raw determination in his voice. Jack had always been bold, but this was different. Marcus could see the flicker of anger behind Jack's steady words, the kind of anger that comes from helplessness. "We're not going to rush," Marcus said, his tone deliberate. "We need to make sure this is handled the right way." Jack's brows furrowed. "The right way? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Marcus replied, locking eyes with his son, "that this is bigger than us now. We need to be smart. We need to make sure this doesn't get buried." Jack looked away for a moment, breathing deeply. Erin stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "Dad's right," she said softly. "If we're not careful, they could spin this against us." Jack hesitated, but finally nodded. "Okay," he muttered, "but I don't want this to just disappear." Marcus's gaze softened. "It won't." He reached out and rested a hand on Jack's shoulder. "I promise you it won't." The next morning, Marcus woke early, his thoughts already racing. The sun was just starting to rise over Santa Fe, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Lisa was still asleep, her face peaceful in the early light. Marcus quietly slipped out of bed and stepped onto the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of juniper and sage. He leaned against the railing and took a deep breath, letting the stillness ground him. But no amount of fresh air could shake the memory of the officers' faces or the fear in his family's eyes. The injustice of it all felt like a weight pressing against his chest. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Lisa stood in the doorway, wrapped in a light cardigan. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Marcus shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Lisa stepped out and joined him, slipping her hand into his. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." They stood together for a while, watching the horizon shift as the sun rose. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I have to do something, Lisa. I can't let this go." Lisa nodded, her grip tightening around his hand. "I'm with you. We all are." By mid-morning, Marcus was on the phone with an attorney recommended by a close friend. The call was brief, but reassuring. The lawyer's voice was calm, steady, and full of quiet confidence. "I've seen this kind of case before," she said. "You're doing the right thing by bringing this forward the way you are. We'll make sure your family is protected." After the call ended, Marcus gathered the family in the living room. Jack had been pacing since breakfast, unable to sit still. Erin sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Lisa stood nearby, arms crossed but supportive. Marcus cleared his throat. "Here's the plan," he began. "We'll send the video to trusted sources, journalists, and legal advocates who can make sure the story stays honest. We'll speak out ourselves, but only when we're ready." Jack's foot tapped against the floor anxiously. "And the cops? What happens to them?" Marcus's face darkened. "They'll face consequences, but that's not just up to us, that's up to the system." Jack nodded slowly, though frustration still flickered across his face. I want them to know they can't get away with this." "They won't," Erin said quietly. "But this isn't just about us anymore." Lisa stepped forward. "Your dad's right. If we do this the right way, we can make real change not just for us, but for other families too." Jack's shoulders relaxed a little as he listened. He sighed and sat down beside Erin. "Okay, I get it." Marcus smiled faintly. "Good, this is how we win." Later that afternoon, they sent the video to several trusted sources, civil rights organizations, reputable news outlets, and attorneys who had a track record of standing against injustice. Within hours, the video was gaining attention. Social media posts began to spread, people expressing outrage, sharing their own stories of profiling and mistreatment. The footage was raw but powerful, and it struck a chord with thousands of viewers. By the evening, Marcus's phone was buzzing with notifications. Requests for interviews began to come in. Messages of support from strangers poured into his inbox, and local news stations picked up the story. Lisa scrolled through the flood of comments on her phone. Some people are furious, but there are others defending the officers. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "There always will be." Erin frowned. "How can they still defend what happened after seeing the video?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Because some people only see what they want to see. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we've put the truth out there." Jack sat up, his face calmer than it had been all day. "It's out there," he said, almost to himself. "They can't hide it now." Marcus met Jack's gaze and gave a small nod. "No, they can't." The following day, a local news station aired the footage, framing the story as part of a larger conversation about accountability in law enforcement. Within minutes of the broadcast, Marcus's phone rang. It was the sergeant who had shown up at the scene. "Mr. Turner," the sergeant began, his voice gruff but measured. "I saw the footage. I won't pretend this looks good for the department." "It doesn't," Marcus replied bluntly. The sergeant was silent for a moment. "I'll be honest, we're already being pressured to issue a statement. This isn't going away." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Good, it shouldn't." There was a pause before the sergeant spoke again, his tone more serious. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "Sorry isn't enough. I want action." The sergeant's response was slow but deliberate. "You'll get it." Marcus ended the call and set the phone down. Lisa watched him from across the room. "What did he say?" Marcus met her eyes. "He's feeling the pressure," he said simply. "They all are." Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "Good." Marcus nodded. "This is just the beginning." The morning sun poured through the windows of the Turner family's temporary living room. illuminating the space with a quiet glow. The house felt calm, but beneath the surface, tension still simmered. The events of the past 2 days hung in the air, like a storm cloud that hadn't quite passed. Marcus sat at the dining table, his laptop open as he scrolled through emails. The video had spread faster than he had anticipated. Overnight, major news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines flashed across the screen: family road trip, interrupted by harassment CIA, father speaks out. Turner family incident sparks nationwide debate on police accountability. Each article brought a flood of new comments, some supportive, some skeptical, and others filled with disbelief or defensiveness. Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't one to seek attention, much less the spotlight. His career had been built on remaining in the shadows, gathering intelligence quietly and efficiently. But this time, he had no choice. Staying quiet now meant surrendering to injustice. Lisa walked in, holding a mug of coffee, and set it beside him. She gave him a small, knowing smile before sitting down. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I'm fine, just processing." Lisa nodded and took a sip of her coffee. "It's a lot." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You've been amazing through all of this." She gave a soft laugh. "Not sure if amazing is the word. I'm running on fumes and sheer stubbornness." Marcus's lips twitched into a small smile. "Still amazing." By mid-morning, Marcus received a call from their attorney. He stepped outside to take it, pacing slowly along the driveway as he listened. "Marcus," the attorney began, her voice steady but serious, "the police department is holding a press conference this afternoon. The sergeant you spoke to? He's going to issue a formal statement and announce an internal investigation." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Good. But I'm not holding my breath for a miracle." "I understand," she replied. "But this is a step in the right direction. They're responding because of the pressure you've put on them. And more importantly, because of the truth." Marcus was silent for a moment, weighing her words. "I need this to mean something," he said finally. "Not just for my family, but for every family who's been through this." "It will," she reassured him. "You've already made an impact." That afternoon, Marcus, Lisa, Aaron, and Jack gathered in the living room, watching the press conference unfold on TV. The sergeant stood at a podium in front of a small crowd of reporters. He looked uncomfortable, adjusting the microphone nervously. "We're here today to address the incident involving the Turner family," the sergeant began, his voice flat but measured. "The actions taken during that traffic stop were unacceptable. As of today, the 2 officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Erin crossed her arms and leaned forward. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. The sergeant continued, his face growing more serious. "We take these allegations seriously, and I want to personally apologize to the Turner family for the distress they experienced." The reporters buzzed with questions, their hands shooting into the air. The sergeant hesitated before continuing. "We are committed to transparency. We've seen the footage, and there's no denying what happened. This is not who we strive to be." Jack stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. Is he really apologizing, or just trying to save face? Marcus's brow furrowed as he watched the sergeant's measured words. "Both," he said quietly. "He knows they messed up, but he's also trying to protect what's left of their reputation." The press conference ended with the promise of accountability, but Marcus knew better than to take promises at face value. Lisa muted the TV and turned to Marcus. "What happens now?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Now, we make sure they follow through." The following week was a whirlwind. Marcus found himself fielding calls from journalists, civil rights groups, and community leaders. Invitations poured in for interviews and public appearances. Erin watched in amazement as her dad spoke with calm authority, navigating each conversation like a seasoned diplomat. Jack worked quietly on his documentary project, sifting through emails and stories from people who had experienced similar situations. Each message added fuel to his fire. He wanted to create something powerful, something that would open people's eyes. One evening, as Marcus wrapped up a call, Jack approached him, holding his laptop. "Dad, can I show you something?" Marcus set down his phone and nodded. "Of course." Jack opened a video file and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing a montage of photos and footage shots of wide-open roads, their family laughing at the roadside diner, and the mesas rising against the blue sky. Then the tone shifted. The video cut to the officers approaching their car, the tension in the air palpable even through the screen. Jack's voice narrated in the background. "What happened to my family wasn't just about a traffic stop," Jack's voice said. "It was about what happens when people in power forget that they're supposed to serve, not control. But this isn't just our story. It's about everyone who's ever been silenced or made to feel powerless." The video ended with a simple message. Speak up. Stand together. Create change. Marcus's chest tightened as the screen faded to black. "Jack, this is incredible." Jack shrugged, though his eyes gleamed with pride. "I just wanted people to see the whole picture, not just what happened, but why it matters." Marcus reached out and pulled Jack into a hug. "You've done something important. I'm proud of you." Jack's voice was muffled against Marcus's shoulder. "I learned from the best." The next day, Jack's video went live. Within hours, it was shared thousands of times. People from across the country commented, sharing their own stories and thanking the Turner family for their courage. Erin watched the reactions flood in, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "We did it," she whispered. "People are paying attention." Lisa smiled, resting a hand on Erin's back. "It's because we didn't stay silent." Marcus nodded as he watched the comments pour in. "This is what happens when you refuse to back down." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a warm glow, the family gathered around the dinner table. Erin raised her glass of sparkling cider, her eyes bright with hope. "To accountability," she said, "and to making the world better." Jack raised his glass next. "To standing up, even when it's hard." Marcus lifted his glass last, his voice steady. "To resilience, and to never giving up." The glasses clinked softly, their sound echoing like a quiet victory. They knew the road ahead was still long, but they also knew one unshakable truth. Together, they were unstoppable. The following morning, sunlight streamed into the kitchen as Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee. The familiar hum of the house surrounded him, the sound of Jack's keyboard clicking as he worked on his documentary, Erin's soft humming as she scrolled through messages, and Lisa's steady presence as she organized breakfast. But despite the comforting routine, Marcus felt the tension lingering beneath the surface. The press conference had been a step forward, but the real work was only just beginning. Promises of accountability often rang hollow without action. Lisa walked over, resting her hand on Marcus's arm. "You've been staring into that coffee for 10 minutes, she said gently. Marcus blinked and smiled faintly. "Just thinking." Lisa pulled out a chair and sat beside him. "About what?" "Follow through," Marcus said. "The sergeant's words sounded good, but if we don't stay on top of this, they could drag it out until people forget." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "So, what's the next step?" Marcus set his mug down. "We push forward. I've been invited to a town hall meeting tonight. Community leaders are coming together to talk about accountability. I'm going." Lisa's expression softened. "You're really stepping into this." Marcus leaned forward, his voice quiet but sure. "I have to. What happened to us? It's not just about our family anymore. This fight belongs to every family that's ever been told to stay silent." Lisa reached out and took his hand. "We're with you, all of us." Marcus gave her a grateful nod. I know. That evening, the town hall meeting was held at a local community center. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, families, students, activists, and local officials. The energy in the room buzzed with anticipation and frustration. Large windows framed the darkening sky, and folding chairs were set in neat rows facing the front, where a small stage and microphone stood. Marcus entered with Lisa, Aaron, and Jack close behind. Heads turned as they walked in, and murmurs spread through the room. People recognized them from the news. Some offered nods of encouragement, others watched quietly, their faces serious. Jack's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. He noticed a group of reporters standing near the back, their cameras ready. "This is bigger than I thought," Jack whispered. Aaron gave him a small nudge. "Good. It needs to be." A local activist, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Reyes, took the stage and greeted the crowd. Sandra's voice was steady, but impassioned. She had been a key advocate for police reform for years, and her presence commanded respect. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Sandra began. "We've all seen the footage. We've all felt the anger, the sadness, and the frustration. But tonight, we're here to turn those feelings into action." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces lit with hope and determination. Sandra gestured toward the front row. "We're honored to have Marcus Turner here with us, the man who stood strong in the face of injustice. Marcus, would you like to speak?" Lisa squeezed Marcus's hand as he stood, giving him a reassuring nod. Aaron and Jack watched him with quiet pride as he made his way to the stage. The room fell silent as Marcus adjusted the microphone. He took a moment to meet the eyes of the people in the audience. He didn't need notes or rehearsed lines. He spoke from the heart. "My name is Marcus Turner," he began, his voice steady. "I'm a husband, a father, and yes, I've served my country as a CIA officer. But that day on the side of the road, none of that mattered. All they saw was a family that they thought didn't belong." The room remained silent, every eye locked on him. "They didn't see us as people," Marcus continued, his voice tightening with emotion. "They saw us as a threat. They searched our car, destroyed my son's phone, and humiliated my family because they could. And if it weren't for Jack's recording, they would have walked away without consequences." Marcus paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He glanced at Jack, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "But here's the thing," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "We're not powerless. When we stand together, when we refuse to stay silent, we can make them listen. We can hold them accountable, not just for us, but for every family that's ever been targeted, dismissed, or ignored." Applause broke out, growing louder with each second. Sandra stepped forward and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder as he stepped back from the microphone. "Thank you, Marcus," she said warmly. "Your family's courage has reminded all of us that change doesn't come from staying silent, it comes from speaking out, even when it's hard." As the applause died down, people in the audience began standing up, one by one, sharing their own experiences with profiling and harassment. A young man spoke about being pulled over on his way home from work, his voice trembling but strong. An older woman recounted how her grandson had been unfairly questioned during a routine stop. Each story added to the chorus of voices demanding change. Lisa wiped away a tear as she listened. Aaron reached for her hand and squeezed it tightly. Jack recorded everything, capturing the raw honesty in each person's words. When the meeting ended, people gathered around Marcus and his family, thanking them for their bravery. A local reporter approached Jack with a microphone. "Jack," the reporter began, "your video has sparked a national conversation. How does it feel, knowing you've made such an impact?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then answered with quiet confidence. "It feels good. But it's not just about the video. It's about making sure that stories like ours don't get ignored anymore." The reporter nodded, clearly impressed. What do you hope comes next? Jack glanced at Marcus, then back at the reporter. I hope that people start paying attention and that things actually change. As the family walked back to their car under the cool night sky, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Aaron looked up at the stars and smiled. That was powerful. Lisa wrapped her arm around Marcus's waist. You were incredible up there. Marcus exhaled, the tension in his chest easing. I just told the truth. Jack slowed his steps, his camera swinging gently from its strap. Dad, do you think it'll really make a difference? Marcus stopped and turned to face his son. Yes, he said without hesitation. It already is. Jack smiled, his shoulders relaxing. Aaron gave him a playful shove. Told you we'd make it through this. The SUV's doors clicked open, and the family climbed in, the hum of the engine filling the quiet night. As Marcus guided the car down the road, the glow of the town hall faded behind them. But the journey wasn't over. In Marcus's heart, he knew the real fight for justice had just begun, but they wouldn't be fighting it alone. The soft hum of the SUV filled the car as the Turners drove home under a blanket of stars. The quiet felt peaceful, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the calm that followed a storm. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, his thoughts running through every word spoken at the town hall. Every face he'd seen, he knew they had made an impact. But he also knew the fight wasn't over. Lisa leaned her head against the window, watching the faint outlines of trees blur past. Erin sat with her headphones in, but she wasn't playing music, just staring out at the night sky, lost in thought. Jack had his camera in his lap, fingers brushing the scratched surface of the lens. After a few miles, Jack broke the silence. Dad? Marcus glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Yeah? Jack hesitated, then asked, Do you think the officers who stopped us, do you think they've ever thought about what they've done? Like, do they even care? The question settled in the air like dust. Erin took out her headphones and waited for Marcus's response. Lisa turned slightly, watching Marcus's face. Marcus exhaled, steady and calm. Maybe, but whether they care or not isn't the point. Jack frowned. Then what is? The point, Marcus said, keeping his voice even, is making sure the system doesn't let people like that get away with it. That's what accountability is for. It's not about whether they feel bad, it's about making sure they're held responsible. Jack nodded slowly, though his expression was still conflicted. Yeah, I get that. Lisa reached back and gave Jack's knee a reassuring squeeze. We can't change their hearts, Jack, but we can change what they're allowed to get away with. Erin spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. And if we're really lucky, maybe the truth will change someone's mind. Jack looked at his sister, surprised by her words. You really believe that? Erin nodded. Yeah, I do. Marcus smiled faintly. Sometimes change starts when people see something they can't ignore anymore. And thanks to you, Jack, a lot of people have seen what happened to us. Jack's shoulders relaxed a little as he leaned back in his seat. I guess so. When they arrived back at Marcus's brother's house, the front porch light glowed warmly in the dark. The family filed inside, weary but relieved to be home. Marcus shut the door behind him and paused for a moment, letting the stillness of the house wash over him. Lisa started gathering cups and plates that had been left on the counter from breakfast. Erin shuffled toward the couch, yawning, while Jack set his camera carefully on the kitchen table. You guys should get some rest, Lisa said, glancing at the kids. It's been a long day. Erin nodded, too tired to argue. Good idea. She disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps soft against the floorboards. Jack lingered, eyeing the broken pieces of his old phone that he had left on the table earlier. His face tightened as he stared at the shattered screen. Marcus walked over and rested a hand on Jack's shoulder. Hey, he said gently. You okay? Jack shrugged. It's just everything. It still feels so unfair. Marcus knelt beside him so they were eye level. It is unfair, he agreed. But you've turned that unfairness into something powerful. What you didn't let them win? Jack's eyes glistened. But why did it have to happen in the first place? Marcus's chest tightened. He wished he had an answer that would make it all make sense, but there wasn't one. I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I do know this. You've already made a difference. We all have. Jack nodded slowly, taking in his dad's words. After a moment, he straightened up and took a deep breath. I'm gonna go finish editing the last clip for the documentary. Lisa gave Marcus a soft smile from across the room as Jack headed toward his laptop. You're good at that, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Good at what? Making them believe things will be okay, she replied. Marcus walked over and pulled her into a gentle hug. That's because they will be. It's just going to take time. Lisa rested her head against his shoulder. Yeah, she murmured. But at least we're not going through this alone. The next morning, the news had spread even further. Jack's video had gone viral, shared by celebrities, community leaders, and activists across the country. Social media was buzzing with discussions about the Turners' experience. Hashtags calling for accountability were trending. Lisa scrolled through the comments at the breakfast table, her face a mixture of anger and hope. So many people sharing their own stories, she said. It's overwhelming. Erin glanced over at her mom's phone. It's sad how many people have been through the same thing. Jack looked up from his laptop. But that's why this matters, right? So people know they're not alone. Marcus smiled at Jack. Exactly. Just then, Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a second, then answered. Marcus Turner, he said. Mr. Turner, this is Sandra Reyes, came the familiar voice of the activist who had hosted the town hall. I wanted to thank you again for your speech last night. It was powerful, and it's already having an impact. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude. Thanks, Sandra. That means a lot. There's more, Sandra added. The mayor's office reached out. They want to meet and discuss a community-led oversight initiative. They're feeling the pressure. Marcus blinked in surprise. Seriously? Seriously, Sandra said. It's happening because of you and your family. Marcus let that sink in. The idea of real, lasting change had always felt distant, but now it was becoming something tangible. I'll be there, Marcus said firmly. Good, Sandra replied. This is how it starts. When Marcus ended the call, Lisa raised an eyebrow. Good news? Marcus nodded. Great news. They're asking for change because we made them listen. Erin and Jack looked up, their faces lighting up with hope. Lisa grinned. I knew it. Marcus's smile widened. For the first time in days, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. As the family finished breakfast, Marcus looked around the table at the people who meant the world to him. The road had been long and painful, but they had walked it together, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was filled with hope. All right, Marcus said as he stood. Let's get ready. We've got more work to do. Erin raised her glass of orange juice. To change. Jack clinked his glass against hers. To resilience. Lisa smiled and lifted her glass. To never giving up. Marcus raised his glass last, pride filling his chest. To us and to making a difference. The glasses clinked together in unison, their sound a quiet but powerful symbol of everything they had overcome. The Turner family stood outside City Hall the next morning, the sun shining bright overhead. The plaza was bustling with news crews, activists, and local leaders gathered to witness the next step in what had become a national story. Signs calling for justice and reform dotted the crowd. Jack lifted his camera and began capturing the scene, the lens reflecting the energy around them. Lisa adjusted her blouse and took a deep breath. This is really happening, she murmured. Marcus slid his hand into hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Yeah, And we're ready. Erin shielded her eyes from the sun as she scanned the growing crowd. There are so many people here, she said. It's kind of overwhelming. Jack grinned as he continued filming. It's inspiring. Look how many people showed up because they believe in this. Marcus nodded. That's what change looks like. It starts with people showing up. Sandra Reyes walked toward them from the main steps, clipboard in hand and an encouraging smile on her face. Turner family, she greeted warmly. Glad you made it. We wouldn't miss this, Marcus said. Sandra nodded and glanced at the crowd behind them. Your story has made a real impact. People are listening. The mayor's office knows that this isn't something they can ignore anymore. Lisa arched an eyebrow. Do you really think they're ready to do something? Sandra's expression grew serious. They're not ready, but they don't have a choice. Inside the large chamber of City Hall, the air was heavy with anticipation. Local officials and community leaders sat at long wooden tables, facing the public. The mayor, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a composed demeanor, took his place at the center. Cameras flashed as the meeting began. The mayor cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone. We're here today to discuss community-led oversight of local law enforcement, a direct response to the events surrounding the Turner family. Marcus sat in the front row with Lisa, Erin, and Jack beside him. Sandra was to his left, her presence steady and strong. The mayor continued. Before we open the floor, I'd like to acknowledge Marcus Turner and his family, who have shown incredible courage. Mr. Turner, if you'd like to speak, the floor is yours. All eyes turned to Marcus. He stood slowly, adjusting the microphone as he faced the packed chamber. He could feel the weight of every gaze, the quiet support, the cautious skepticism, the curiosity. He took a breath and began. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to everyone here today, Marcus said. His voice was calm, but carried across the room. I didn't expect to be here. My family didn't plan for any of this. We were just taking a road trip to celebrate my daughter's achievement. He glanced at Erin, who gave him a small, supportive smile. But what was supposed to be a celebration became something else, a reminder that no matter how much you follow the rules, sometimes the system still sees you as a threat. A murmur rippled through the room, but Marcus pressed on. We're not here to call for chaos. We're here to ask for fairness, for respect, and for accountability. What happened to my family shouldn't happen to anyone. And if we're serious about change, then it's not enough to issue apologies or place officers on leave. We need a system where transparency isn't optional. It's mandatory. Sandra nodded, her eyes bright with approval. Jack had his camera trained on his father, capturing every word. Marcus's voice softened, but didn't lose its strength. I don't want another father standing where I'm standing, explaining why his family felt powerless. We deserve better. The room was silent for a beat. Then applause broke out, hesitant at first, but quickly growing louder as more people stood to show their support. Marcus stepped back, his heart pounding. He hadn't come to impress anyone, just to speak the truth. Lisa reached for his hand as he returned to his seat. You did it, she whispered. Erin smiled through tears. You were perfect, Dad. After the meeting, the crowd spilled out onto the steps of City Hall. Reporters shouted questions, but Marcus and his family kept moving, sticking close to Sandra. People from the community approached them, some sharing their gratitude, others their stories. A young man in his 20s walked up hesitantly, holding a folded piece of paper. His eyes darted nervously, but he seemed determined. Mr. Turner? Marcus stopped and turned. Yes? The man swallowed, then spoke. I just wanted to thank you. What you did today, it means a lot. My brother was pulled over last year. Same kind of situation. No one believed him, and nothing happened. But seeing your family stand up like this, it makes me think things can actually change. Marcus's chest tightened. I'm sorry about your brother. he said sincerely. "But I'm glad you're here today." The young man nodded and handed Marcus the folded paper. "This is his story. If you're ever able to share it somehow." Marcus accepted the paper with a somber nod. "I will." Jack stepped forward and held out his hand. "We're not done telling stories," he said. The man smiled and shook Jack's hand. Back at Marcus's brother's house, the family collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but exhilarated. Jack set up his laptop and began uploading the footage from the town hall. Aaron leaned over his shoulder, scrolling through the latest comments on social media. Lisa walked in with glasses of iced tea and handed one to Marcus. "Did you see the latest post?" she asked. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What post?" Lisa smiled as she sat down. "Sandra posted a picture of you speaking today. It already has over 50,000 shares." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm not used to all this attention." Aaron grinned. "You'd better get used to it, Dad. You're kind of famous now." Marcus took a sip of his tea and leaned back. "It's not about being famous," he said. "It's about making sure the conversation doesn't stop here." Jack nodded from behind his screen. "It won't. Not if we have anything to say about it." Lisa reached for Marcus's hand. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Marcus nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "And we're just getting started." The family sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, their silhouettes framed by the warm glow of the room. Outside, the world continued to change, but inside, they found strength in their unity. No matter how long the road ahead, they would walk it together. The morning sun cast a golden glow across Santa Fe as the Turner family gathered around the breakfast table. There was a quiet sense of calm, but beneath it, something stronger, a feeling of resolve. The past few days had been overwhelming, but today, Marcus felt something different. Hope. Jack sat with his camera balanced beside his plate, scrolling through messages of support pouring in from around the country. Erin was stirring her coffee absent-mindedly as she read a news article that featured a photo of Marcus standing at the podium. Lisa moved around the kitchen, wiping the counters and humming softly to herself, a small but genuine smile on her face. As Marcus sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sandra Reyes. The mayor's office called. The Community Oversight Initiative passed. They're forming a review board with civilian representation. You made this happen. Marcus set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, letting the news sink in. The weight he'd been carrying since that roadside stop began to lift, piece by piece. Lisa noticed the change in his expression and raised an eyebrow. Good news? Marcus nodded slowly. They passed the Oversight Initiative. The city's creating a civilian review board. Aaron blinked in surprise. Wait, really? Jack nearly knocked over his glass in excitement. Dad, that's huge! Lisa's eyes widened, then softened. She walked over and wrapped her arms around Marcus from behind. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Marcus reached up and took her hand, squeezing it. We did this together. Later that morning, the family gathered in the living room for a video interview with a national news station. Jack set up the tripod, adjusting the angle and framing before stepping behind the camera. Ready? He asked. Marcus nodded. He sat with Lisa beside him, their hands clasped. Aaron and Jack took their seats just off camera, but close enough to feel part of the moment. The reporter's face appeared on the screen, her voice warm and professional. Marcus, your family's story has sparked something incredible: town hall meetings across the country, changes in local policies, and countless stories of people speaking out. How does it feel to know you've made such an impact? Marcus took a breath and looked into the camera. It feels surreal, but this isn't just our story. It's the story of so many families who've been through something similar. We're just the ones who were seen this time. The reporter nodded. And what do you hope comes next? Lisa leaned forward slightly. We hope this leads to real, lasting change, she said. People shouldn't have to record their trauma for the world to believe them. But since that's where we are, we want those recordings to mean something, to push for better policies, real accountability, and respect. The reporter's face softened. You've become symbols of resilience and unity. What advice would you give to other families who feel powerless? Marcus glanced at Lisa before speaking. You're not powerless. You may feel small in the moment, but your story matters. And when you share it, you realize you're not alone. The reporter smiled. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you to your entire family for your strength and your voices. The interview ended, and Jack stepped out from behind the camera, beaming. That was awesome. Erin stretched her arms out and laughed. We're officially advocates now, huh? Lisa ruffled Erin's hair affectionately. Looks like it. Marcus stood, rolling his shoulders. Let's go outside for a bit. We've been sitting in here all morning. The family stepped out onto the front porch, where the afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows. The air smelled of desert sage, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees. Erin took a deep breath. I feel like I can finally breathe again. Jack lifted his camera and snapped a candid photo of her. Breathe in peace. You've earned it. Erin rolled her eyes, but smiled. Lisa leaned against the porch railing, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. So, what now? Marcus smiled thoughtfully. Now, we live, we rest, we keep moving forward. Jack lowered his camera, and we make sure people don't forget. Marcus nodded at his son. Exactly. A faint honking sound made them turn toward the street, where a familiar black SUV pulled up. Marcus's brother, Nate, stepped out, waving enthusiastically. You guys ready for some fresh air and food? Nate called out. The family laughed and began gathering their things. They had promised Nate they'd spend the afternoon at a nearby canyon trail, followed by a cookout at his place. As they piled into Nate's SUV, the mood was lighter than it had been in days. They drove with the windows down, letting the wind whip through their hair. Jack filmed the landscape as it flew by the red cliffs, the wildflowers blooming despite the harsh desert conditions. When they reached the trailhead, they unloaded their backpacks and water bottles. Nate led the way, cracking jokes and telling stories from their childhood. The trail wound through rocky outcroppings and narrow ridges that overlooked miles of open desert. Erin paused at a high point and gazed out over the view. It's beautiful, she murmured. Marcus came up beside her. It is. He glanced at her. Kind of like life, it's full of hard climbs, but when you get to the top, you remember why you kept going. Erin smiled. Yeah, I get that now. Jack joined them, pointing his camera toward the horizon. Okay, group shot. Everyone in. Lisa, Nate, and Marcus huddled in with Erin and Jack as the timer blinked. The camera clicked, capturing a photo of them mid-laugh, their faces lit with joy and relief. That evening, as they sat around Nate's backyard fire pit, the sky turned a deep indigo. The crackle of the fire mixed with the sound of crickets. Jack passed his camera around so everyone could see the photos he'd taken that day. Lisa rested her head against Marcus's shoulder, her eyes half closed. This feels right, she murmured. Marcus wrapped an arm around her. It does. Erin raised a stick with a marshmallow over the fire, her smile soft but steady. To family, she said. Jack lifted his own stick. To resilience, Lisa added. To hope. Marcus watched the flames dance, their glow warm against his face. To making the world better, he said quietly, one step at a time. The family's laughter carried into the night, a sound of healing, unity, and love. No matter how long the road ahead, they knew they had already won something powerful: strength in unity, and a belief that even in the face of darkness, change was always possible. The Turner family's journey is a reminder that no matter how difficult the road, resilience, truth, and unity can light the way forward. Their story proves that when we stand together and speak out against injustice, real change is possible, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. If this story moved you, remember that your voice matters too. Whether it is standing up for what is right or supporting someone who needs to be heard, we all have the power to make a difference. If you believe in stories that inspire, empower, and ignite change, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can build a stronger, kinder world, one story at a time. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next story. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to let us know how this story impacted you. Your voice matters, let it be heard.